Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back for episode 202 of the Freight 360 podcast. Thank you for your continued listenership. Continue to share us with all your friends in the industry. We've got an awesome episode on prospecting today. It's probably the most requested topic. We're going to get into the kind of like the quantity of leads versus the quality of leads and break down different tactics that different brokers use and some tips and tricks along the way to help you kind of balance that out and figure out what the best option is for you. But if you're watching on YouTube, please leave us a comment. If you have questions on anything, leave a comment, send them through the website, and we'll get them answered on the Final Mile podcast that'll come out on Tuesday. And for a more in-depth look into our training and options, check out the Freight Broker Basics course. It's our full-length, self-paced course where we teach you everything from getting your brokerage started with getting your authority and bond and all of that good stuff, and building up your book of business, growing it, managing the back office, and everything in between. This episode is brought to you by Blue Book Services. Are you looking to quickly identify qualified sales prospects? Looking to develop trusted, sustainable business partnerships? Well, look no further. The Lumber Blue Book is an online directory and credit resource for the lumber and forest products industry, covering mills, manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers. Their database of over 23,000 lumber companies can be searched and segmented to develop sales and marketing campaigns. Members receive access to real-time credit and business information for companies throughout the industry. To learn more, go to lumberbluebook.com and click join today. That's lumberbluebook.com. Well, Ben, I'm coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee this week. I feel like I've done a bunch of episodes from Nashville at this point, but it's hot, man. I feel like I can kind of like, it's not as hot as Florida, I'm sure, but it's uncomfortable. I don't know. How's things for you?
I didn't notice. I was looking at, the kind of shipping I'm doing, I'm getting more into commodities, and I was looking at the weather charts, and they always publish them within the different grain markets. And I noticed that like right where you live, like there's this little area of the country, and there's like a little area in like the Northwest kind of where it just says like normal. The whole rest of the country is like above average, way above average, too hot to pay attention to. And then it's just like right where you lived is normal. I was like, it must be nice. Yeah. I'm like, so he's going to be in for a rude awakening when he's down in Tennessee for a
week.
Dude,
so today I was at like a chicken place for lunch, and I was like, all right, it's 80s. I'm like, why does it feel so hot? And the humidity's up. I look at the real feel, it's like 104 or something like that. Yeah. I'm like, okay, well, that explains it. Because it was like kind of overcast at the time. And I'm like, why am I sweating? Like, I was like, let's sit outside. And I'm like, I wish we would have sat inside. But oh, well. It is what it is. Sports, I don't have actually, it was NBA. Is it LeBron's son that suffered cardiac arrest? Am I losing my mind? One of the basketball players, I don't really follow basketball a ton, but I saw something.
I don't, but I saw a headline with his name in it, but I didn't see or read it, so I have no idea.
Let me double check it here. This would be, LeBron James. It's his son, Bronny James, suffered cardiac arrest this week. The good thing is, so he's young, he's 18. Very quickly, he was stable and taken out of the ICU. So you never like to see that, dude. It's scary stuff, man, whether it's an 18-year-old athlete or DeMar Hamlin in his young 20s, anybody, man. It's like scary stuff to see, and hope for a speedy and healthy recovery for him for sure. So,
yeah.
Other than that, there's really not a whole lot in sports. Like it's that weird time of year, man.
We have a new Open champ, a new champ. I really should know this, and I feel like it's kind of sad that I don't.
For golf?
Yeah. What do you call it? Like there's a name for when you win that tournament that is the only tournament because it's the oldest, and I think it's the champ.
Let's look. The Open Championship. So the British Open. You're talking about what they title the champion?
The winner. Yeah.
All I see here on Wikipedia is the Open champion. But there's got to be somebody leave a comment telling us how stupid and ignorant we are, please, and give us the correct answer.
It's the claret jug, obviously, but like they reference. I think it is like the champion, or like, because it's considered like the oldest. So if you win that one, you're like the champion of the whole, like basically for the year until the next one.
Yeah, it says the trophy is commonly known as the claret jug. Winner keeps the trophy until the next Open, at which point it must be returned and a replica is provided as a replacement. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Wow. Very cool. If the winner is a professional, the winner's share is 18% of the purse. They're guaranteed entry to all future Open championships until age 60.
I think it's like the champion golfer of the year.
Oh well.
I don't use up too much.
Let us know in the comments. Send us a message.
Yep.
That's all I got for sports. Some news in the freight world here. So we sent, make sure you guys are subscribed to our newsletter. If you haven't, just go to freight360.net and there's a subscription button like right at the top. It's totally free. We give you all the coolest, latest content. Kind of like your morning brew, but for freight once a week. So the big one, so Surge Transportation, this happened this week. They're a digital freight brokerage that started, I don't know, in the last 5 years or so. Might have been a little bit longer, but they got up to like 100 people. Let's see, they started in 2016. Yeah, so 7 years ago, got up to 100 people, gross revenues of approximately 150 million in last year, 2022. But obviously with the downturn, the demand for that kind of digital freight matching went down, right? And they filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy in Florida. Is it Chapter 11 where you reorganize, or is that just like, hey, we're basically liquidating and going out of business? Do you know?
Also, another one that if it wasn't so late in the day, I would.
There's one. Is it like Chapter 7? Is like
Chapter
a reorg?
7 and 11. 7 and 11, yeah. I think, are the two most predominant. One is your liquidation, and one is operating under it.
But yeah, that's huge, man. Like,
oh yeah, 11 is. Yeah.
Which one is it?
I think 11 is.
Yeah. Okay. So, what do you think causes that? My thought was that they had so much. Well, they probably had a lot of stuff leveraged, or they had investors trying to pull money out of whatever it would be. But I also think that they probably had so much that went into the technology side, and they hoped that it would pay off dividends with an increasing demand in transportation. Whereas essentially a freight recession or recession of freight rates took a serious hit on them, right? Like a regular brokerage. So I'll give you a couple different examples. A TQL style brokerage who has people on salary has no choice but to lay people off, right? If you're in a straight commission kind of brokerage, like an agent model, you're not as vulnerable to those kinds of freight rate or just freight demand recessions in general, because you're just paying out a commission based on what's produced. And if less is produced, your fixed costs go down, right? But your variable costs are fairly low when it comes to your sales reps. Whereas the W-2 model for some of these companies, if they didn't have, a lot of, if they're not very cash liquid and able to be sustaining people until they either have to get let go due to poor performance, they're going to be laying people off because they just can't afford to keep them on the books, essentially, Yes.
And I think they had, in the article I read, about 100 people were working there at the time. Now, two things. Well, I think there's three things that happened with that company. One, almost every one of the digital brokerages that I ever talked with or was able to get behind the scenes on, and this is years ago, and this may have changed, right? So I'll put a big caveat there, but call it like 2019, 20, around there.
Yep.
Most of them, the front end of their business is the digital brokerage. But behind that digital brokerage, there are still people making all the phone calls to the carriers. They're still covering loads. They're still doing traditional brokerage. It's just to the customer, it seems like you are literally purchasing transportation in the same way you buy like Publix delivery from Instacart, right? Like, oh, I can just see the rate on these lanes. This is helpful. And again, those models primarily only work on cheaper freight that is very price sensitive, that the customer doesn't care as much about service on. Their more important priority stuff goes to traditional brokerages because they want to know where it is. They want to trust the person doing it. And they want that type of reassurance with a human being, right?
Yeah, think about it like
yeah.
this. If you went on Uber and you just want, hey, just get me a car, get me picked up, get me delivered, dropped off. Uber's fine. User interface is great, right? If you know, like, I need to be at this place for this important meeting at this time, I'm going to be calling like a chauffeur service or an actual like some kind of shuttle service or like cab company type style thing before I'm gonna book an Uber. Dude, I literally when I was driving to the airport, or we were heading to the airport before we went to Florida in April, we had to take two cars because we had so much luggage, and the goal was like my wife's gonna take her car with her mom in it, and her mom can drive the car back, and I was gonna Uber with a bunch of our luggage. It was gonna work out great. That way we had no car at the airport. Well, what happens is I schedule my Uber the night before. The morning of, I go like, all right, cool, where's the Uber? And it's like trying to connect you with the driver. Driver hops on, driver then hops off.
Cancels.
Another driver gets hopped on, hops off. Eventually we get so close and I'm like, screw it. I got to take my own car and just leave it at the airport. That's the kind of unreliability you have when you work with a platform like that. So there's a time and a place for it.
And agreed. So two things happen, right? So one is you're operating with almost fixed margins in a company like that because they're competing with Uber Freight. They're competing with, I think Convoy has one similar to that. I know Loadshore, I think, has one. And the point is, right, when you're in that product, you're kind of tied in to what you're ever going to be able to charge your customers. They're used to it. They're used to what they're buying. You can't just up your revenues or increase your margins. So you're stuck there. You got fixed costs on the back end of all these people that are actually making the phone calls to get them the trucks at the lower rates. And on top of that, most of the spot freight that was probably going to these companies all dried up and has moved to contract. Like if you looked at 2 years ago or during the heat of the pandemic, 30% of the loads available in the market were going to the spot market. Now that's like 3%. So not only did their business dry up, their margins were fixed at lower numbers, they've got fixed overhead. And here's the biggest kicker. If they weren't cash flush and putting cash reserves away and they had debt, because lots of tech companies have levered debt in, as soon as the Fed raised the interest rates, their cost of borrowing went through the roof, their revenue stayed the same, their fixed expenses couldn't move, and the amount of business in the market shrunk. I mean, that's a recipe for something collapsing in and of itself. So
I'll read the final paragraph from this article. It came from FreightWaves. You can get a link to it from our newsletter, but it says, typically, freight brokerages manage revenue volatility through flexible operating expenses. Computers and chairs don't cost much, and incentive-based compensation grows and contracts with market cycles. That's why I mentioned, like with the agent-based thing, right? Or if you have low salary, high commission. If you have high salary, thinner commission, that's where it's tough. It goes on to say, that's why hiring sprees and layoffs at freight brokerages are relatively common, but outright failures are relatively rare. It's also why industry observers will scrutinize Surge's bankruptcy filings for clues as to how the brokerage got into such a desperate situation. So there's probably some stuff, if you were to open the hood on their books and how they operate, they clearly, my guess is they tried to grow too fast and they did it in a way that was not safe to market fluctuations, which is silly because we all know if you've been in this business long enough, and I assume they did, considering they bootstrapped a company 7 years ago, the market does fluctuate. And they should have seen that if they started in 2016, they should have seen that happen in 2018 and then into 2019, like the 2 different years, right? So
exactly.
And then COVID shutdown and then post-pandemic or post-shutdown surges, like no pun intended on surge, but like they should have seen it. They've already seen at least 2 market cycles before this one. So I don't know. It sucks to see some that happen, but hopefully they'll be able to reorg. And my question is, like, what shipper, knowing that they're filing Chapter 11, is going to want to do business with them? You know what I mean? Or what carrier being worried that will I get paid? Yeah, your bond is $75,000, but that'll dry up real quick if you go out of business.
Yeah, that's nothing. I mean, that's not going to mitigate that risk at all. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm anxious to hear kind of how that plays out and what comes to the surface over time.
Yep. All right. Well, let's give a shout to DAT, and we're going to get into the episode.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the industry. You'll get real-time rates on every lane, so you'll know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you'll get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Take advantage of a free month of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes.
You know, it's funny. So, like, I'm pretty sure it's August 1st, DAT, or sometime in August. DAT1 is like the new platform. You can't use like the legacy DAT Power anymore. So my company was like, hey, let's make sure we get a training with them so everyone knows how to use the new one if they don't already know. And I was like, ooh, luckily, when they first rolled it out back in the beginning of the year, you and I hopped on with them to learn all the differences, like how how Lane Makers works, how their new future rating tool works, how like loads are now called shipments or postings are now called shipments, whatever it is. And they have the tracking feature and all this cool new stuff. And you could do the book it now, all that stuff, and have your preferred carrier network. Good thing is, and the takeaway here, tech will always evolve. And they usually give you a grace period to transition over to a newer version of whether it's DAT or anything else. Your TMS could do the same thing. Get ahead of it, right? Stay interested in all the new tech that's coming out. Take demos of stuff. Learn all the new tools and features. Because one of the cool things with the DAT upgrade, some people are scrutinizing I don't like this. Well, because it's changing. It looks different and you have to click a different spot. But it's actually more functional, in my opinion, once you learn how to use it. But there's a lot of tools that if you don't learn what they are, you're missing out. And you're paying for it. And you're getting all this great stuff now. So take advantage of the training that's out there. We've got some videos on YouTube that cover it. DAT's got some videos that cover it. And just learn, because that stuff's pretty cool.
I will tell you, I saw a funny post or meme sometime this summer where somebody like my age wrote, I now finally understand why my parents never wanted to learn computers or reference some tech. And they said, like, now every time I see a new tech product come out, I just go, yeah, I'm not taking the time to learn that. It just made me laugh because I'm like, that exactly described exactly what you were just kind of walking through. Take the time. It'll be worth it in the long run, and it'll save you time overall to do it.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Hey, random, before we get into the topic, did you see Paul from Freight Caviar shared a post on, I think, Instagram this week of the dude that's like an infamous double broker, and he like admits to it, and he's like, yeah, I double broker. I've probably double brokered like loads to you or you know, loads from you or whatnot. There's this dude like drives a Maybach, and he's got like super nice cars. He's got like, you know, his bling and his necklace, chains, all that stuff. And he's just out there, like, his mentality for him and his company is, we're going to double broker. That's how we're going to do business. He's like, I'm not being fraud. I'm finding actual trucks and I'm getting a lesser rate and I'm getting paid and they're getting paid. It's like, dude, that's illegal still. So I'm actually hoping to get to the TIA policy forum in September. I got to figure out if the dates work out, but because the FMCSA is going to be there to listen to the TIA members. Yeah. So I'm pretty excited that FMCSA or TIA put that out, I think, last week. And I saw it, and I wasn't going to go this year, but I'm like, I had a great experience last year. But the missing piece was like, well, congressmen, you know, senators and representatives and all that stuff, like they only have so much time. So if you're talking to one of their aides, does the point get across? Does anyone actually do anything with this? But if FMCSA, now that they're under pressure, if they're like, all right, I will be there for a hearing, and I will be there to listen to you guys and have a conversation, it's going to be a way more fruitful conversation. So I'm going to hope to be at that one in September. We'll see. All right, let's talk prospecting, man. We were talking about this before we hopped on to record it. And so I'm going to start with a couple of thoughts, and I'm curious what your take is on it. So we often tell people when you first start prospecting, the goal is just hammer out calls. Just start doing it, right? Get 500 leads, get 300 leads, whatever, and start making dials. We call that like quantity, right? Just get as many as possible. And over time, your goal can, your approach can switch to, well, I don't want to make 100 calls to just anybody out there. I would rather make maybe 20 calls to some really good quality long-term play type of leads. The reason I think the quantity is so important early on is you're getting in the repetition, you're putting the reps in, you're starting to like really work those muscles of making the calls, learning, finding your voice on the phone, starting to hear what some of the basic common objections are from shippers, from gatekeepers and stuff like that. Whereas when you get to a very high quality lead, and this might be somebody that has a 6-month RFP or onboarding cycle or process with multiple iterations, a ton of different requirements to get in, it's a different style of prospecting. And I don't think you're ready to do those more high quality leads until you understand the basics and have put in a ton of repetitions. What do you think about that overall concept of, I think quantity is good at first, but the goal is to get to quality?
Hell yeah. I mean, Zig Ziglar, like the father of like sales psychology and techniques going back to like probably like the 60s and 70s. I don't even think he's around anymore. Used to sell tapes, right? That used to listen to on this. And there's a famous quote from him: repetition is the mother of learning, the father of action, which makes it the architect of accomplishment. But I mean, the first part, right? Repetition is the mother of learning. Everything you've ever learned in your entire life, you do by doing it over and over again. That's the way your brain works. That's how you build up the pathways. That's how you get better at it. That's what instinct is. So wholeheartedly agree that you've got to start by doing it, and you're going to fall and you're going to make mistakes. So it also doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense to spend a lot of time researching companies that you feel you really want to work with to start. Like, you're going to bump your head, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to say stupid shit. Like, do that in calls that have very little value and have low risk, because also you won't feel as frightened because they're lower risk, right? Like, you're gonna bump your head, right? Like, your first car when you learn how to drive isn't the nicest car in the family. Usually it's the hand me down, because you're gonna ding some things, you're gonna
Yep.
back out, maybe hit a mailbox here or there, what have you, right? Same thing here, right? And you'll be more inclined to actually do it, which is the more important thing. But I totally agree that you should be moving towards a more strategic approach. And I think that some people get there naturally. But I've thought about this a lot recently because I'm prospecting a lot more. And I look at my numbers, what I do, and how I do what I do. And it is very different than when I started. And I don't know that everybody does it that way, because I definitely know brokers that still do lots of business and they still are kind of random, like call it scattershot approach to prospecting, which can work. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why that usually is the case, right? So
Really
when you
quick,
go,
I want to
yes,
your point about Zig Ziglar. He did in fact pass away in 2012, RIP. So he is not around anymore, but great guy. He lived like he was like 90.
very
Dude was
long
awesome.
life. Yes.
Yeah, continue.
And anybody out there should look him up and watch or listen to some of his content, because I've heard of people that I follow and read now, right, that still reference his books and content as some of the most influential things they've read early in their career. The guy who wrote Purple Cow, Seth Godin, actually referenced him quite a bit about how he was so impactful in his life. And he's written a ton of stuff on this topic. But to the point, I think, about why this is done this way, and I was going to do a video on this, is that most larger brokerages are structured. We know this, right? Like, they're going to pay you a salary. They're going to train you, right? But there's two things that happen there. It costs a lot of money to hire people and then to fire them if they don't work out. And so for most of these bigger brokerages, their largest expense, right, isn't really the buildings. And we just talked about this earlier in the news, right? It's actually in hiring the people that don't work out that you have to let go, and you pay them for while they're here. You pay a headhunter, sometimes an internal recruiter, to find them. They come in, they make it 6 months, they wash out. That's their biggest expense. So what they do to mitigate that expense, right, is I don't want to say they don't train as extensively as they could, but there's not a lot of thought or intention around teaching people how to prospect strategically. One, because it would cost more money to have somebody training these people for longer periods. You have to pay a trainer, and that person's time you're also paying. But the second thing also that happens is that other people have customers and protected prospects. So most people can't just pick targets and go and shoot at them or find a prospect they want and then call them. It takes time to get prospects in your name. So really a lot of your prospecting, because of the structure of these organizations, are you go into their system and you can just randomly just start having leads kicked out at you by some criteria. But for the most part, they're random. Like you're just calling 100 random companies every day, just like we suggest to start, which is great practice. But once you're in it and you know what you're doing, it's not very helpful. And it's very hard to even call your shot and go after it because someone else has it in their name or you're stepping on someone else's toes. And the bigger companies, that's one of the drawbacks to working with them. So most people end up just doing this, like we were talking about earlier, the poke and hope approach. If anybody's ever played pool in their life, right, there's basically two strategies. You can be a shark where you're looking at your second and third shot when you take every shot. So you know you're positioned right for your next shot and your next shot after that. Or you just hit the cue ball and hope a ball falls, and then you figure it out once you get there, right? And I think the poke and hope approach is really where most people start and kind of stay.
Yeah.
They don't really know what else to do.
Yeah. So here's what I think is a good strategy for a new freight broker. So your quantity approach, as we've said a couple of times now, is a great way to start off making a lot of phone calls, because you're going to give yourself more chances to find a customer or uncover opportunities just through the the vast quantity and volume of contacts that you're making. Now, once you do that for, let's say, 3 to 6 months, let's say you've got a couple of shippers that you're working with and you're getting some repeat business out of them. You don't have the time in your day to continue to make 100 calls a day, just quantity.
Yep.
This is a great time to start. And it's not like you flip a switch and you change. You gradually shift towards a more quality type of approach where what's a higher quality, a cold call or a referral through an existing customer? Obviously a referral, right?
Yep.
Much higher quality. It didn't take much time because you already have the customer. They're going to help you out, or you've got a BOL of where they're who they're supplying, or if it's inbound, who their supplier is, all that kind of stuff. And then it could turn into, all right, we've got a very good diversified portfolio of our book of business now. Now we're going to take a look at some of these big whales, the ones that are really hard to get in with. And this might take you might be 2 to 5 years down the road, depending on where you work and the type of business model you have. But this is where you're trying to get with higher up people in an organization, like your director of logistics or transportation, your VP of procurement, whatever the case might be, or whatever they might call it. But you're trying to really get in with influential people that can talk the same talk as you, which is a high level proficiency of understanding the supply chain and logistics. Because the average young broker they can't speak it, let alone they don't understand what goes on at that high of a level. But it's good to be in the trenches first and work your way up. And once you can have those conversations, it's not just, hey, I can find you a truck and try to save you money. It's, hey, if we do X, Y, and Z with your supply chain, we can get you guys more efficiency and give you reduced cost. And what that's doing is you're an extension of their supply chain division there. You might look at warehousing opportunities, switching some of their modes of transportation from LTL to partials. Some of the stuff might start going on box trucks or an expedited route. You might try to find ways to shorten miles between distribution centers. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can do this, but those don't happen when you're doing the poke and what do you call it? Poke and hope, right? Like the post and pray when I talk about post and pray on the boards, right? This is like stuff that when you get there and when you can like visualize and see and comprehend what's going on at that level, it reminds me of like The Hangover when the guy's sitting at the blackjack table and the numbers are like all the numbers and math signs are just kind of floating around. Like he's like, oh, I can figure out all the card counting. That's like when you get to that level though, it's fun. And that's why I love to do what I do every single day. Like I was helping a guy out today with a massive bid, and we're trying to figure out ways to like very, very quickly get the rating part done. So then that frees up more time to think about strategically building a relationship with the customer at a higher level. Because that's where the real money is made when you get to that point.
Yep. So
but you got to earn your way there, realistically.
You do. You don't start at the top, right? And you got to start at the bottom with the crumbs and you work your way up, right? So I want to talk about a few different things and some hot button issues because we get asked like, oh, do research. What does that mean, right? And granted, like most of the information I use and I find a prospect, I did not. I'll find on a website. They're like little breadcrumbs, right? But it's far more like I feel like it's far more like detective work. So the first thing I wanted to say, and this came up this week, right? One of the guys I work with now on the bulk side, we were talking about this. And a lot of the bulk commodities get moved and tendered by commodities brokers, the people selling corn, distillers grain, and the raw materials that go into make things, right? So once we found out, or once I learned how the market's moving and who's actually arranging the transportation, see our earlier episode on what freight tendering mean and who arranges it. Once we found out like these are the personnel that actually are arranging the trucks, then the next question I'm asking myself is, what is important to that person? Put myself in their shoes. What do they care about, right? And they care about how commodities are moving in the market. That is determining how much business they have. And that's determining how much business I have access to, right? So I'm spending most of my time learning the ins and outs of how that works, right? Where can I look at commodity prices? When can I see when they're going up? When are they falling? What does the harvest look like? Because the more I can understand my customer's world, the more I can relate to his problems, get him to tell me the things that he needs as it relates to his job, not my job. And again, what that really looks like is if I'm a rookie, I'm asking him, what freight does he have and what lanes can I move and what can I put a rate on? Low level, right? High level strategic is, hey, talk to a guy this week. Hey, Lev, I noticed the corn market's been going up all week. He's like, yeah, I know I've been getting crushed on a bunch of my deals. But I also read in the headlines this morning with some of the news coming out of Russia last week and Ukraine, if the grain corridor gets shut down, it could drastically affect what the corn markets look like and the wheat, and what's happening here on the global supply affects his job, right? By bringing that little piece, right, which came from a newsletter or just a small article I read over the weekend, I opened up a whole conversation into understanding how he's doing his job. And you know what I learned while he was telling me about? It had nothing to do with trucking. Learned where his other customers were, learned where he's trying to get more customers, and guess where his pain points are. Finding and getting transportation that is reliable, that he doesn't have to worry about, so he can go and do what he does well, which is get better prices to get more contracts to give right to me to go move more business, right?
It's almost like instead of answering the question of what is it that you need, it's why and how is how that's all happening. So real quick, I want to take a moment to mention one of our sponsors, Lean Solutions Group. Are you looking to take your freight brokerage or agency to the next level? Look no further than Lean Solutions Group. They are industry leaders in nearshore staffing for logistics companies with offices located in South America, Mexico, and the Philippines. They offer a wide range of exciting positions, including freight broker back office operations, accounting, tech and web development, business development, marketing, customer service, and more. Don't miss out on the opportunity to work with the best in the business. Visit their website at www.leangroup.com to learn more about the exciting solutions that they have to offer your freight brokerage or agency. All right, continue.
So I'm going to go through also more like a 101 level for, I think, most of our audience. And this, I'm going to take us through an example of an asset company and then tie in brokerage so that I think this will make sense to both, whether you drive a truck, own a trucking company, or you're in freight brokerage, right? Because they're the same commodity. And from the customer's point of view, the shipper, they're often looked at as if they are the same. They are not. And we've talked about this a lot, and I'm not going to have time to go into it now, but they're very different. But from our customer's point of view, we are often compared directly against the trucking company as a broker and vice versa, and we are at a price disadvantage. We've got to make a premium on top of their bill. If I got to send a rate in and they got to send a rate in, they will beat me most times, right? So what you want to think about is if you are a trucking company, right? Efficiencies, like you mentioned earlier, right? There are certain hot button issues that will resonate with a customer. And most drivers know this, which is also why my favorite place to get information on a customer is from, or a prospect is from a driver that has maybe been there that can tell you how's the loading, how is it to get in and out of there, how's their dwell time, how is the facility to deal with overall, right? Because you'll find oftentimes there's a hot button there, and I'll give you one, right? So for instance, hey, there are places that you, if any experienced brokers know, when you call carriers, they'll just go, oh yeah, that's where in Gary, Indiana? Oh wait, hold on. What's the commodity? Yeah, I'm not going there.
Yeah.
And you're like, nope, absolutely not. Well, it's because like these guys have loaded there. Well, do you think that that's probably valuable for that shipper to know. And again, they probably do know, but again, this is that inside information or research that you want to find out, right? Is how are they viewed from the carriers? If they're a pain in the ass to deal with, they're going to have a hard time finding reliable trucks that go in there, right? Without paying a premium. So you can kind of almost assume that's happening, right? Some other hot buttons, right, are the term backhaul in itself, right? The term backhaul, right, comes from the fact that like a typical trucking company will charge more for a front haul, meaning if they pick up at their customer on Monday to start their week, and that's the customer they work with and have worked with the longest, like they usually have a little bit better rates as a front haul rate. So we'll say if rates are $2 a mile, maybe they're getting $2.10 a mile as a front haul rate. Now, if they find another customer that ships back to where they need to go at the end of the week to get them home, let's just say they only run 2 loads a week, right? They run halfway out and then, run halfway back, right? Well, when that carrier goes to that other customer and says, hey, I deliver loads across the street, we'll say, every week. I got 3 drivers that come here, deliver here every Wednesday. We know you guys, it seems like you ship outbound in the other direction. Hey, we'd love to work with you because it's easier for us to rely on your business than to go to the spot market, hope we get a good rate from a good load that doesn't have a lot of risk in it, right? Maybe it's a pain in the ass to deal with. Maybe the loading is an issue. Maybe they load you too heavy. Maybe they don't load you correctly. Maybe it takes too long. And you don't know that. So there's risk from a driver's point of view to the spot market. So they'll go to this business and say, hey, I need to go home. I got to get back to Pittsburgh every week. I will give you a decent rate, a backhaul rate to get me home if you guarantee me loads for my drivers to get me home every week. Quid pro quo. I gave you something, you give me something. I offer you a lower market rate and you give me the freight I can rely on that's lower risk, right?
And for anybody like at the base level here, don't take that across the street as gold.
Literally.
Take literally like a 20, 25 mile radius around where your destination is. And if you can prospect a commodity that will go on the same equipment type and it is a backhaul, a driver is going to see that as essentially the same area, right? They're not having to deadhead 100 miles. They might be driving 12 miles or 20 miles, right? If it's only going to take them half an hour or so to get to the next place and they can park their truck, get their 10 hours, and then boom, next morning they're loaded up and they're on their way back home. That's wonderful. They're not leaving a metro area dealing with a different city's traffic and all that stuff.
Exactly. So, right, for the truck, their most expensive thing, other than the truck and their gas, is really their time. That's where they lose a lot of their profitability, waiting to get in, to get out, or to get loaded. So if they can minimize that, they're way more efficient. They're way more profitable. But to the shipper, they get a lower price. So it's a win-win there, right? So one of the things you can do in prospecting is if you've got somebody on the phone is, I will often go at that and say, look, like I've got customers that literally deliver like right by your facility. It's like 15, 20 miles or to your point, somewhere within a pretty tight radius. And I'm like, I send a handful of guys every week right by you. Do you happen to have anything that's headed either northbound or maybe even westbound as well? Because some of my drivers live up north, some of them live out west. And when you frame it that way, these shippers, right, and your prospects are very used to having that conversation with carriers. So when you say, I've got drivers and I want to find some backhauls for these guys looking for basically loads going in one of two directions, to them, they hear discount. You didn't say cheaper, you didn't say discount, and you intentionally don't say that, but that's what they're hearing. That's how you can get them to start paying attention and to feel that you're actually going to try strategically to provide value to them. What you referred to earlier. They know the brokers they've worked with the longest find ways to do that for them. That's what they're looking for in a good broker. And that is one of those ways where you can like crack the door open so that you can start to get some visibility and what other lanes they're moving and where and when and the volumes on them.
So I want to add this in here too. And we talk about how there's turnover in positions at the shipper, right? Whether it's a traffic manager, logistics coordinator, whatever. And a lot of times, the person that is tendering freight out, they're probably not 20 years tenured, right? It could be an entry-level job for them at some point. So they may not fully understand the concept of backhauls and especially of deadheading. So when they say, well, I need a truck from here to here, they don't know that, oh, well, there's not a lot of capacity in the immediate area right now we're going to have to bring somebody in from 80 miles away, and that driver is going to want to be compensated for their entire drive, not just when they pick up. So you have to almost educate some of these younger traffic managers and logistics coordinators of how the market works. And guess what? Once they learn it and they do a good job and they get efficient and they get promoted, boom, you got to train the next person on how to do it. One of my guys right now got a great customer, awesome relationship, gets almost all their freight. The guy got promoted to the next position up and he's worried. And I'm like, well, don't worry about it. Like, do you have a relationship with the new person or with the colleagues or with the boss? He's like, well, yeah. And he's like, and they live close by. I was like, great. Why don't you go and meet the entire team, take them donuts one day and congratulate your contact on his promotion and, kind of spend some time with the facility. There's ways to take what might seem like adversity, AKA, my contact got replaced, or this person doesn't understand what they're doing because they're brand new. Take it as an opportunity to educate them, build a relationship. They're going to feel like, wow, I learned something from working with this broker. It's going to make me look a lot better when I get our stuff way more efficiently operating, and our costs might be, if not lower, they're stable.
And to be honest, like that's how, like, I see that as an opportunity, right? Like, again, yeah, there's some risk and it does make you a little nervous because there's a lot of unknown. But the reality is if you can build rapport with that new person and you can get them to trust you, right? You can theoretically become kind of like their mentor, right? Outside of the company that has that information that they're not really comfortable sometimes even asking their boss about, right? And that's the play I would make is like, hey, look, I'm here. And to be honest, even if you have any question that you feel even might be silly, and I know what it's like to have a new job, bounce it off me. Shoot me an email. Give me a quick call. I'll be happy to help you in whatever way I can above and beyond what I do, helping you just move your company's products, right? Yep. Because now if that person can literally start to trust you and rely on that information, you might get more market share. You might end up with more business than you got from your previous contact.
Yep, absolutely. You build a lot of trust that way. Yeah. And another thing too is if that new person starts to trust you and they were just told, here's the 3 brokers that we use, right? Well, they start to trust you more and understand and learn from you. They might say, well, yeah, I don't want to use that other guy over there for all these lanes. I'm going to start to throw some of them your way, like you just mentioned, getting more of the market share.
Yep.
So, good stuff.
Now, a couple other things too that I think are helpful on this topic, we'll kind of round it out, are just like ways that you can create referrals, right? That aren't really referrals. To just list a few, like BOLs that your company has is the easiest. I'd say like lowest hanging fruit. If you are your customers that you mentioned earlier, huge one, right?
Because explain the BOL one first, right? So you're going to have you're going to have your shipper and your consignee. So your pickup and delivery on every bill of lading, and you should have, most likely you'll have digital copies somewhere imaged in your TMS or accounting system or wherever. But if your customer is the receiver, prospect the shipper. If your customer is the shipper, contact the receiver. That's what we mean by the BOL. Basically, for every load you ship, you're getting
2 companies,
potentially a new lead, unless it's a repeat lane and you've already, that lead already exists. But yes,
absolutely.
And then referrals, customer, right?
Customer, right? And you can get these conversations, right? Like, hey, most of my first conversations with a prospect have nothing to do with shipping and had everything to do with their business and their industry. Hey, I will talk. If it's pipe, I will be looking at that in the morning. If I'm calling pipe companies in Texas, you can be certain I'm looking at the oil market, whether it's going up or down, and what has happened over the past month or two, because that's what that matters to that person. That's what's going to determine their business. I'm going to have conversations. Hey, just see that the market's doing this. I'm curious how that's affecting your business. What's the outlook? Those are questions that aren't invasive, but you'll usually get an answer. You'll get a better understanding of that company, and you build rapport along the way without seeming like you need something, right? And one of the things you get is they'll often tell you who they do business with, right? Or, hey, out of curiosity, who are some of the customers maybe you guys kind of work with? And I won't say ship to. Guess what? I know that person's name and that company. I can call that other company that afternoon and be like, hey, I was just talking with Jimmy over at Acme Supply. He said you guys do business together. Thought it was worth reaching out. They'll assume that I work with him and he's my customer without me even saying that.
So to add to the point about, if you're gonna hire or not hire, if you're gonna work with a customer that deals with oil, you're going to be looking at the oil prices and all the news about it, right? Those are the kind of things that really fall into that quality of leads, right? And especially when it comes to finding a niche. And we've got plenty of content talking about how to find your niche. So check that stuff out as well. But you will never become a true expert in your field in transportation if you try to do a little bit of everything. It comes down to that whole repetition thing. If I do 10% oil equipment, 10% produce, 10% frozen meat, 10% ice cream, 10%, right? And the list goes on. I'm never going to be really strong in understanding the commodities, the supply chain, or have a strong carrier network that services all of those specific commodities. That's why if you can truly lock yourself in, like to your point, with anything oil related, and you could, replace oil with any other commodity, you better be in. Like, part of your job is to stay up to date with what's going on in that market. Not even just transportation related, but what's going on in that market. What are the economic driving factors and forces that can swing that market one way or the other?
Exactly. Whatever you're moving, ask yourself the question, what needs to happen for people to buy more of this thing? What needs to happen for people to buy less of this thing? And in either end of that, answers to those questions is going to tell you where to look to get some of that information, right? A few others that I definitely wanted to mention are, if you're new and you're just dispatching or covering loads for a brokerage and you're wondering, you're just starting to prospect, you're talking to carriers all day long. Don't just dispatch them, get the job done without building a little rapport and asking them. They have other customers. They were at other shippers this week. They know what's going on there. They were at other receivers. They know who needs help. They know who doesn't need help. And they're a great source to find companies that are maybe looking for additional capacity because they're expanding. The market is what it is. That doesn't mean companies aren't still doing well in this market. And I promise you, there are absolutely, I talked to one this morning, was a Fortune probably 100 company, and they expect their business to double in the next couple years. And it doubled in the past couple years. So no matter where the rates are, they're expanding lanes, expanding volumes, and there's tons of opportunities once you can get in there. So talk to more of your drivers. They're going to be some of your best lead sources. And the last one I wanted to mention, like, I got probably 5, we'll say they'll probably all be customers. I've got like 2 or 3 out of these 5, but I got all 5 of these right because somebody was complaining that they couldn't find work in one of the message boards. And it was actually, it was on like bulkloads.com. But I mean, the same thing goes to like our Facebook group or any of these. And somebody came in and said, hey, if anybody needs some help finding business, like, give me a ring. I'll be more than happy to help. Well, literally the first thing I did was just call the phone number and was like, hey, saw this post this morning that you said you're available. You got more business than you could handle. Figured it was worth touching base and just introduce myself. That person gave me inside tracks into some of their customers because they can't handle all the business, as well as other customers that have asked them to do work for them and they can't. Again, one was a broker, one was a trucking company. Both gave me leads and everything I kind of needed to know on what these companies were struggling with. So guess what? When I get on the phone with them, I've got basically all the ammunition I need to have an effective conversation and to move the ball forward. You're not trying to make every play be, a touchdown. Most of this job in prospecting is moving the ball 2 or 3 yards every play, every day until you get to the other end of the field. Some will make it into the end zone, some won't. That's just part of it. But your goal should be, you should be able to move the ball with 1 or 2 prospects almost every single day. And if you do that consistently, you will have a very profitable career.
Absolutely. Well, good stuff, man. Great discussion. I always love to talk about prospecting because it is one of the biggest things that we talk about because new folks are very interested to learn about it. And oftentimes their company doesn't do a good enough job explaining this kind of stuff to them. So make sure you guys go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, as a reminder on that, because that was something we were talking about earlier, is if you are at one of those companies, if you go to our website, freight360.net, and we're trying to reorganize it a little bit so it'll be a little easier to find content. But there, if you go to the podcast tab now, there's a search bar on our page that will come up, and you can put in any topic or keyword that you want to learn about, and it'll pull up all of our content that is related to that. So a great place if you are at one of these brokerages and you do want more training or more resources, it's free and it's literally on our website.
Absolutely. And make sure, hope you guys enjoyed the Q&A, the Final Mile by Freight 360 this week. And make sure you stay tuned for another episode. Now you're getting double the content. That'll come out next Tuesday. You got any final thoughts today, Ben?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.